The time is now 6:04 p.m. I would like to call to order the January 13th, 2025 Board Audit Committee meeting. Welcome, everyone. My name is Pamela Boozer-Struther, acting chair of this committee and the District 3 representative on the Prince George's County Board of Education. Tonight, this committee will listen to the Capital Improvement Program Overview Process, Part 2, under the Audit Committee responsibility of oversight of risk assessment and risk management in compliance with law and regulations. 1.2 roll call. Ms. Barton, please call the roll.
Good evening, everyone. Ms. Pamela Boozer-Struther.
Present.
Mr. Jonathan Briggs.
Present.
Mr. Brandon Jackson.
Present.
Ms. Lolita Walker.
We have a quorum present. We will now have introductions of committee members, starting with board members, administrative staff, board office staff, and our guests for the presentation this evening. If you'd like to kick us off, Chair Jackson.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brandon Jackson, Chairman of the Prince George's County Board of Education, member of the Audit Committee. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Jonathan Briggs, Vice Chair of the Board of Education and District 2 Board Member.
And we could now have our colleagues who are attending the meeting but not voting members of the committee.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Tiffany Anderful. I'm District 1 Board Member.
Good evening, Robin Brown, District 5 Board Member.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mia Barton. I'm the Board of Education staff member.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janice Walter-Semple, the Acting Internal Audit Director.
Good evening, Sharaska Coleman, Chief Operating Officer.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Anthony Neal, Internal Auditor.
Good evening, everyone. Jason Washington, Associate Superintendent of Supporting Services.
Good evening, everyone. Shayla Jackson, Director of Capital Programs.
Good evening, Will Smith, Project Manager Supervisor, Department of Capital Programs.
Good evening, Ricardo Smith, Fiscal Supervisor, Capital Programs.
Good evening, Lisa Howell, Chief Financial Officer.
Well, I'm Ben Hanks. I'm also with Internal Audit.
And I believe that concludes all introductions. So thank you all very much and welcome. The agenda item 1.3, Committee Oversight Mission. The Committee Oversight Mission is as follows. The primary purpose of Prince George's County Board of Education Audit Committee is to provide oversight of the financial reporting process, the audit process, the PGCPS system of internal controls, and compliance with laws and regulations. Item 1.4, adoption of the January 13th, 2025 Board Audit Committee meeting agenda. The question is to adopt the January 13th, 2025 Board Audit Committee meeting agenda without objection. There being no objection to the January 13th, 2025 Board Audit Committee meeting agenda has been adopted. Agenda item 1.5, approval of December 9th, 2024 meeting minutes. The question is to adopt the December 9th, 2024 Board Audit Committee meeting minutes without objection. There being no objection to the December 9th, 2024 Board Audit Committee meeting minutes have been adopted. Item 2.0, public comment. We have one registered public comment speaker this evening. The Prince George's County Board of Education recognizes the need for members of the public to provide comment and opinions to the members of the Board of Education regarding agenda items for designated meetings and on education in general. In your verbal, written, pre-recorded video, audio testimony, you're asked to use titles rather than the individual names of anyone you need to refer to in your testimony. Refrain from using any vulgar remarks, inappropriate language, or making personal attacks against anyone. Include only your name and the date of the board meeting at the top of your testimony. I'm sorry, that's for written. So we do have a live public commenter. So I will now recognize Timothy Meyer, individual protecting board integrity, for the 3-minute timed public comment. Thank you so much, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you very much to the committee. And as we face budget gaps, every dollar counts. It's been 175 days since news reports about a former District 1 board member betraying public trust, leaving his constituents with no representation by living and working in Missouri for 6 months. To be clear, a laughably incomplete summary from the OIC, buried on election eve, isn't even close to transparency. It's cause for the entire OIC to face a vote of no confidence and General Assembly repeal. Among the many unanswered questions, we know that between January and July 2024, this former board member attended multiple education conferences and events. What we don't know is who paid for those expenses, or which school district he was officially representing. Who paid for flights, lodging, per diem expenses, registration fees, and other costs? Was he a Maryland school official traveling on Missouri taxpayers' dime, or vice versa? Taxpayers deserve to know if they paid even a penny so this former board member could go network on behalf of his new Missouri employer. And frankly, if he was still representing himself at these conferences as a PGCPS board member, Missouri taxpayers and state officials deserve answers too. Plus, whether he used any Missouri taxpayer-funded days of leave so he could moonlight as a Maryland elected official. The OIC doesn't even touch these questions, or give answers on any other taxpayer-funded expenses for conferences, professional development, or other costs. Their summary report contained only basic salary, a calculation that should have taken a few days, not 4 months. It was 10 pages full of blame game, but there wasn't a single word calling for $9,700 in PGCPS funding that's currently missing in Missouri to be returned. To our friend from the Show Me State, we say, show us the money. PGCPS students need and deserve every dollar. That's why I'm asking this committee to get real answers for taxpayers and complete the failed audit complete the full audit that OIC failed to do. You did not cause this mess. No current board member secretly took a new job, moved 800 miles away, and conspired to deceive voters by running for re-election, while their allies circulated a memo openly admitting that they never intended to serve in the first place. But what if any other PGCPS employee did something like that? It would not be optional to respond to an audit or to pay back any funds that were improperly taken. Board members, both current and former, must face a higher standard. Thank you, and I'd be happy to submit an official detailed request to this committee for the public record.
Thank you so much for your comments. We just have one public comment speaker, so we will now wait for the timer to end. And we will move to agenda item 3.0, discussion on capital improvement program overview process. I recognize Mr. Jason Washington, the Associate Superintendent of Supporting Services, to give us the capital improvement program overview process part 2 presentation.
Thank you so much, Board Member Boozer Strother. Good evening, the Audit Committee members. My name is Jason Washington, Associate Superintendent of Supporting Services, here to introduce our Director of Capital Programs, Director Shayla Jackson, and her team. who will provide a second part of the presentation that we provided and that was provided in December. I turn it over to Director Jackson.
All right. Good evening, board and committee members. I hope you're having a good start to 2025, and hopefully this little trip into construction delivery methods will be an enjoyable kickoff to the audit committee meetings this year. Last time we met, the request was for an overview of project timelines. So we went step by step through our typical new school construction processes. We went from conception to completion, and we covered all the necessary approvals. Where we skimmed a bit was mainly on two areas. We only looked at the steps as they apply to one project delivery methodology. The steps still apply to the other ones we're going to discuss, sometimes concurrently and sometimes just in a slightly different order. And then second, we only briefly touched on how funding is actually requested. So this evening, we're just going to dig a little deeper into those areas. First, I'll walk you through our different delivery methods at a high level. Then we'll tackle how multi-year funding ties into total project costs in the CIP itself. After that, we'll open it up for questions and respond to or explore any areas that are most interesting or worth diving into. And for that, I'm joined by William Smith, our project management supervisor, and Ricardo Smith, our fiscal supervisor, who both bring substantial and specific expertise to our discussion topics tonight. So much so I promise to shamelessly punt hard questions their way. So let's jump into delivery methods. So the last presentations you could see that was based on design, bid, build as a model to discuss those steps. It's the most historically typical method, not just for PGCPS, but really for construction in general. It has been the go-to process in that for centuries. So when you think of structures from the original London Bridge to medieval cathedrals, it's like master builders would present a design, submit a bid, and the job would go to the lowest, sometimes qualified, sometimes not bidder. So if you fast forward to today, design bid build is still a solid and respected tool, especially for simpler and more straightforward projects. So when I first started PGCPS, that was 2014, we used it almost exclusively back then. And it can work well when conditions are right, but we all know that cheapest at the start isn't always cheapest at the end. So we made some adjustments over the years. For example, we introduced a qualification step almost 10 years ago to make sure we're hiring skilled contractors and not just the lowest bidder. And that was a hard fight at the time because even though that now governmental regulations nationally as well as COMAR have changed to really expand that quality-based selection ability, back then it was still purely cost-based options for some of our funding sources. So it was a bit of a fight, but that's in place now. So that's one measure. Another thing is these days you'll find we use design bid build very strategically, mainly for projects where we can tightly control the design documents and minimize surprises, because in that bid process, whatever is in the design documents becomes the contract, and that's all the builder is responsible for. So when a number of unknowns pile up, maybe aging infrastructure, weird phasing requirements, hidden conditions, potential unusually long permitting hurdles, or it's maybe a particularly innovative building type, that's probably time to consider some of our other tools. That brings us to construction management at risk. So this method flips the script just a bit. It brings the builder into the design process versus showing up on bid day. So if you remember design bid build, the bidder is selected after the design is complete. They compete their price based on that design. And so therefore their contract excludes anything that's missed, whether it's an unforeseen or an unforeseeable condition or just an error in the design documents. But with CMAR, the builder comes on board during that design phase. So if you imagine you're building your dream home, instead of finishing the design and then finding all the contractor bids come in twice higher than you budgeted, you can hire the builder early. So they work alongside your architect and they can give you real-time input on deliverability, on phasing, and regular cost estimates as the design progresses. So that way there's introduction of a collaboration. So you can design a project that's feasible from day one and also best represents where you actually want to invest your money. So those real-time costs can really help because the CMR can say, hey, it's going to cost you 2 times your budget. And the reason why is maybe this specialty roof, or your plan to live in it as we build it is adding another 200,000, and maybe roofs and occupied construction aren't where you want to spend your money. Maybe you'd rather couch surf. So I kind of stole those examples from Suitland High School, but it really does add early numbers and early collaboration. So you can make adjustments early and ensure you're putting your dollars where they really matter to you, and to reduce the surprises later. So for Suitland, of course, there's been roofing type changes to try to save money. There's been phasing evaluations, but those are the type of items that can come up early when your builder is involved real time during design. Again, with design bid build, you just put that design out, but you don't just put the design out, you put a completion date on it, you put your occupation requirements, and you just receive back a hard bid number. So with CMAR, there's some other tricks too, with a guaranteed maximum price and shared owner savings that can change depending on how you solicit and the timing and how you write the contract documents. If you're really interested in that, that's one of the things we'll happily punt to our subject matter expert on the call, William Smith. We are using this though for Suitland. We're using it for Cool Springs. We're using it for New Northern. I might be missing a few of the recent deliveries, but we'll punt that to Will too.
Cherokee Lane.
Cherokee Lane, thank you. Next, there's construction management as agent, or CMAA. This model has similarities with CMAR, but the construction manager acts more as an agent and not the builder. So they coordinate with the designers and contractors and trades, but they don't assume any financial risk. So without a GMP and CM at risk, we are at risk as PGCPS. So cost overruns become our responsibility. So this model requires rigorous oversight, a lot of procurement manpower, because we hold all of these individual contracts with the trades directly. And then we manage them like a general contractor would do, or a CMR would do. And done right, it can represent cost savings because you don't have that same overhead and profit layer that your GC or your CMR has. So if an agency has really ample human resources in the procurement department and the project management department and the QC and on-site departments, like some of our neighbors, I can see how it becomes a favorite for them. I think Anne Arundel County Public Schools is all about it. And right now we're just using it for William Schmidt Outdoor Education Center. And then let's just quickly pivot to multi-year, the CIP funding versus total project cost. So these terms are often misunderstood, but the difference is that total project cost includes everything. The early prelim planning, design, construction, furniture, technology, even the temporary facilities, sometimes temporary utilities. It's just the all-in price from start to finish, but we don't request that full amount up front. So like we don't have money that is sitting, in an account that we're drawing from. Instead, our projects are funded with multi-year CIP allocations with smaller amounts approved annually by the state and county government. So 1 year's funding might cover the design, the next year, early site work, later years fund construction at the tail end, furniture and fixtures. And it's kind of corny, but if you think of it like a cross-country road trip, like you refuel at regular intervals, not all at once. And ideally, the refueling is matched to your need, because you get in trouble if you have too much spare gas, and you definitely get in trouble if you have too little. And I mean that literally, because that's our issue. If we have a lot of unspent allocations, it's trouble for us, because now future funding is threatened, and now you have allegations that you're misusing funding. And so if we have funding, of course, that is too little or delayed, now we have a situation where contractors can walk off the job, or we can face escalating costs. So coordinating funding cycles with the project draw or funding or spending schedule is really a critical part of that funding picture, outside of just getting a really good nail down on what your total project cost would be. And I'm just going to make one quick note on that total project cost piece, because there's a timing piece associated with the CIP there too. So going back to Suitland High School as my example, it was first presented in the FY16 CIP. So that was the FY16 to FY21 CIP. So 16 was the budget year we were requesting, but we presented the funding plan through FY21. So Suitland High School had to have a number assigned to it. Now, back then, we have no clue about COVID and hyperinflation, but we also don't know whether Suitland High School is 3 separate schools on 2 sites, which was the then political favorite, or it was one co-located facility. The scope was just in its infancy. Therefore, the budget that had to be identified in the CIP for the out year FY21 was a rough order of magnitude estimate, a very rough order of magnitude estimate. And that's very typical for us. Maybe not COVID and the hyperinflation, but it's that having to put a number so early in the planning process before a project scope or budget is refined. It's very typical, for example, for a high school, you've got to put a number on it before we even know how many students are going to be enrolled in it, how big it's going to be, what programs are going to be there. So those are really rough numbers. And as the planning process continues and program elements are identified, our rough order of magnitude budgets are still that rough, but they're less rough the closer we get to design. So then as we move into conceptual or preliminary design phases with our architect and engineering firms, we can develop more accurate estimates based on site studies, soil conditions, scope refinements. For example, our feasibility studies help us determine the most cost-effective approach. They look at the building's condition. Are we renovating? Are we replacing? Are we doing a hybrid? Like, do the soils require some ridiculously expensive remediation or foundation types or potential building materials? So with each progressive phase of the design, we move from rough order of magnitude into cost estimates. And with each stage of the design, those cost estimates are more and more refined. And then it is on bid day where those estimates really become actual construction costs, not the total project cost. So I just think I bring up those iterations of budgeting to note that when you hear budget overrun, the phase and the roughness and the order of magnitude status matters. Because is it more than just the master plan level budget that was mentioned in a 10 or 20-year forecast? Is it that the budget is higher for one building and now that building is replacing two projects that were in the master plan? Is and actually overall a savings? Or have we just overspent our actual cost estimates, or worse, our final construction appropriations and are truly in an overrun situation? So that bit of context is just very important. So with that, I just want to note that, the way we deliver projects and secure funding, it continues to evolve a bit, and we continue to reevaluate at the close of each project, like how we can improve. Like, is that the right delivery method for the next project, or do we need to modify the solicitation documents or the contracts to maybe secure up an area where we noticed a little bit of risk or where we found that our contractors didn't have enough teeth for us, and just making sure we're using the right tools for the right jobs. I also want to note that board member Boozer Strother sent me a link to this vendor who does a really great job making these things like interactive and accessible for stakeholders. Because I also know that the CIP funding request really makes a lot of sense to the accountants, analysts, and the staff bureaucrats who create and approve it. But I'm hoping we can advance kind of on how we tell these stories so people can see how projects are planned, how they progress, how they're funded, how they're delivered, without getting like a PhD in these 400-page PDFs. One of the areas we would expand to is on our prior year funding and what was approved. So, because sometimes what we hear is, hey, like, you didn't invest in my roof, and you want to say, well, we asked for roof funding for 6 years and we got $0. Don't quote me on that. That's not exactly right, but it's close. And if that information was accessible in a way that you didn't have to dig through those 400 pages, I think it would really help tell our story a little better. I think with that, I'll open the floor for questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I think that is exactly the kickoff we were looking for, to actually start talking more about budgeting, contracts and planning and payments in this idea of the internal management that's happening in your division, and the and risk assessment. So for the order of questioning, I'll have colleagues, Vice Chair Briggs and Chair Jackson, have the opportunity to go first as seated members of the committee. And then I will welcome our colleagues, Board Member Brown, Board Member Anderful, to ask questions, and then I'll go at the end of first round. So if everyone's amenable to that, we'll go ahead and do it that way. And raise your hands if you do actually want to ask some questions. Thanks. I'm not seeing hands. I don't know if that's Vice Chair Briggs, do you have questions?
No, it's funny that you said that. I don't have a question, but I feel inclined to ask something. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say this because I didn't have a question, but I have a thought. So I was curious, Dr. Jackson, Miss Jackson, if you could just provide some more context on like how everything you shared here, which is really complex. I think I know myself at least needs more time to like make sense of what you just shared. And if there's a document that you can share after it, that would be really helpful if there's something that we can read. But aside from that, was just curious if you could just provide any more context on like how the state deficit and everything that's happening with the blueprint, how that may impact any of this, if at all, and how you all have any, are considering contingency plans, if that's necessary.
That is a really tough question on the availability of funding, because right now, when we put that CIP together, I talked about how it's one budget year and then it's the 5 spending plan years. It is really tight right now, just trying to stay in that debt limit. We are trying to look at options to save a little bit of money on Suitland that aren't kind of painful. We're trying to look at what we can do with New Northern and High Point High School, and to also afford Cool Springs, all kind of simultaneously. There's an overlap, but then there's still a really, really big need to invest in our roofs. We still need to do ADA upgrades to respond to actual student needs. We still need to do major repairs when emergencies come up, like bricks falling on students. There was a picture of ceiling tiles falling down from a roof that was in poor condition a couple months ago, and I don't have those answers. And then we're trying to work through some of the blueprint things through our master plan process. Like, are we helping with the facility portion of that expanded pre-K need? And it's been difficult to really quantify what the need is and what we can do. Do we have a project in the books that will help? I mean, yeah, we're building the Riverdale Early Childhood Center. That's a few classrooms. Every elementary school in P3 had more pre-K classrooms than we've done before. But are we really like positioning ourselves to advance blueprint? I'm not sure. We've talked around the CTE expansion requirements as we look at New Northern and as we look at High Point, trying to make sure that we're providing, if not a full meeting of the mandate right now, at least are we providing capacity for those buildings to grow into what they need to be? But no, we haven't figured out how to deal with our current budgets. Just to throw these numbers out again, we need in today's dollars $570 million a year to finish our modernization plan. And last year we got about 120 million. So any conversation about future shortages kind of just, this is panic. Like I don't have a good solution.
Okay, and I have 10 seconds, but I was just going to say, I think you kind of answered the question I was going to ask as a follow-up, which is what can we do as board members, as far as advocacy goes at the state level, to kind of encourage and push on you all's behalf in coordination with the superintendent. But I think you answered that question. So thanks so much.
Board Member Brown?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. That was a wonderful presentation. I know you do not have an easy job whatsoever, but I'm curious, as far as like talking points to the public, when they see new builds, right? And they are kind of looking at their roofs and saying, well, how are we building an entire new school? But again, there's bricks falling, or these lights have, been broken for some time. What is the language, or I guess what is the language that you would like for us as board members to speak on that, number one? And then number two, what is the process in, I guess, the criteria of what's in line? I know the meeting that you all had October 24th kind of discussed a little bit about it. But I think there are members of the public that just kind of want a little bit more clarity on like, well, how come these people get a new building, but we're still struggling? So can you kind of speak to that a little bit? And I know ADA compliance is one of those things where it kind of scares me a little bit because, you know, we do get federal funding, and I believe that some of that federal funding does have to go towards compliance per se. So can you kind of explain as far as talking points are concerned, and as far as, you know, what the criteria is and what that looks like for ADA compliance as well? Thank you.
I don't think I can do that in 56 seconds, but I'm really, really gonna try.
The
The
chair,
other
the chair extends the time for the answer.
you. The other part of, I think it was a December presentation. In addition, I tried to expand that bit because I think the other presentation had been about how do we prioritize new schools, and that was about those core principles where we look at facility condition. You know, how bad are the windows? How bad is the structure? Can we heat and cool it? We look at educational adequacy. Are the classroom size is too small? Is the parking lot unsafe? Is the configuration unsafe? And we look at utilization. Is it overcrowded or is it undercrowded? Could we consolidate, or how many seats do we need to add? But there was a hole in how do we then plan our smaller projects, you know, like roof replacements, window replacements. And that piece is different because some of that comes from the shops. So actually scared me. So without the presentation, I forget which shops it is, so I'm not gonna try to quote the numbers, but it comes from the building services shops. So they are out there trying to patch those windows all the time. So if they tell us, you know, this is where we're noticing the most leaks and water infiltration, this is where we're trying to patch this roof the best we can. We also just know the age of these things. We know the age of the windows, we know the age of the roofs. We know that based on the size of our inventory, we need to be replacing like 15 roofs a year, and we haven't had the funding to do that. So we have an idea of this backlog. So a lot of it comes from our operation partners, whether it's the maintenance team, whether it's the grounds team, you know, we're like, hey, you know, this playground is unsafe. Whether we've got our hazmat, I don't know his proper title or position, but it's okay, you know, he lets us know where asbestos ceiling tiles are a problem, where they need to be replaced, where asbestos containing floor tiles need to be replaced. We have a laundry list of needs identified for the ADA piece. I will tell you, we don't have, beyond modernizing all the facilities, we don't have a ADA compliance piece. We have an ADA reaction piece. So what we do is, somebody calls and says, I have this student coming in and we need a chairlift. So the ADA funds go to put in a chairlift, sometimes to make a curb cut so you can get up there. But I'm gonna tell you, some of those aren't satisfactory because we do that. But suppose the curb cut got you up to the door, you can open the door and the first thing you see is like stairs. And suppose it's like Northwestern High School and it's all these individual buildings that go up, and it would need like 10 elevators. Like, we don't have a comprehensive plan outside of modernizing. And I will just also say, one of the internal friction points is we could spend all of our budget times 3 just fixing HVAC, because we know if we can't heat and cool it, we have to close the school down. So there's a lot of internal pressure on how to meet those pieces, when to invest in new schools, because we also know we can't just keep patching these old buildings up, they're coming down. So it's a continual, it's a struggle point.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing hands. Oh, Dr. Anderfull?
Thank you, Board Member Boozer Strother. You may actually know this answer, but, and so forgive me if this is already public information, but of course, High Point High School is in my district. And so I am wondering, because of the many questions that I get, just what can I actually share with regard to the plan, or is there somewhere that constituents can follow along with the plans and the process? Is that somewhere publicly available?
Yeah, we do keep our project pages pretty up to date. High Point High School definitely has a major project page. It has the town hall presentations from the design team, the schedule. It's on our website. I always go to www.pgcps.org/CIP. I know they changed it to like offices, but I asked them to make sure that always links back to our CIP page because we've just used that for so long. You know, and if you look there and there's more information, we would be happy to, you know, flesh that out and provide what you need.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, colleagues. Vice Chair Briggs, could you recognize me so I could have the privilege of asking questions, and then we'll flip back?
Yep. On to Board Member Booster Strother.
All right, thank you so much. So I've definitely been interested, and you touched on for a second, was these cost escalations on the basic materials like steel that we ran into, where we had, like you said, you set sort of the expectation of what a elementary, middle, or high school design will cost, but then we ran into, like, we always know there's inflation, but we went from this estimate in 2017 of the $8 billion backlog that probably today we could say is really 24 million in today's dollars. Is that leveling out? Like, so that's my first question, is are prices leveling out, or is this is inflation and price in the cost of material going to keep being a challenge?
I'm gonna ask Will if he's seen some of those recent numbers, because I haven't. I haven't seen any of the smaller bids coming in.
Yeah, so what we're seeing in the industry is, in essence, the pricing has plateaued, and I think no different than we're seeing as homeowners and consumers. The prices have went up fast, but don't go down as fast as they go up. And so, while yes, we are seeing some reductions, but they're smaller percentages in lieu of, as you mentioned, steel. Steel went up over 180% during that time period. It's not going down 180%, within that same range. So, but the prices has come down some, but just not as fast as where we were pre-COVID.
All right, thanks for that, because I mean, for me, when I look at, the, risk assessment of this is if we're already at 25% funded of our full needs, that would each of those dollar costs were less, and that's less schools, and that's more risk to our students and staff in these buildings. That in 2017, we were talking about the 60-year-old buildings on average, and now all of a sudden they're 70 years old, right? I mean, this is just again, it's just untenable, as we message our state and county funders around this issue. The other issue I have from as we manage perceptions of I would like to ask Vice Chair Briggs if I may have some more time.
Of course.
Thank you.
2 more minutes. That's it. No, I'm
Two more
kidding.
minutes. Oh, that's perfect. Okay. So my next question is that I think sometimes there's the perception of what is mismanagement, or, how, from my perception as an underfunded school system for decades, in the Kerwin Commission and Blueprint for Maryland's Future further validated that for the state and PGCPS in Baltimore City in particular, that I feel like our staffing of your division is not the staffing to get the results that are expected and demanded, and that can be confused with mismanagement or waste or abuse. But in reality, it's just an underfunded department without the staff expertise to work at the level that we have asked of you. And that's not even the full level that if we had the full funding, we would be asking of you. Can you speak to what this division should look like to eliminate sort of that tension that I feel like I see as a board member? Thank you. That's my last question.
I'm going to answer some of that. I'm going to ask Will to chime in there. But, there was that study done. The previous executive director for Maryland Public School Construction came in and compared us to other LEAs that look like us. And at the time, and we had about a third of the staff we needed for the number of projects. We have been able to get more project managers, for example, but right now we don't have any planners. So a lot of these questions that you're asking, this is planning team stuff, but we don't have any planners, and we've had some challenges getting that hosted and filled. We also just, even then, we'll have a smaller planning team than, for example, Montgomery County has like 6 to 7 planners. We're just trying to get 2. But when you look at the magnitude of what we're managing, it starts in the planning unit. We just got design architects this year. Well, now it's 2025. So last year we got 3 design architects. That's a very big deal because they manage the projects up front. And our project managers, when I started, I had just these ridiculous number of projects per project manager. For somebody with like 100 projects, no, you cannot manage that well. And I think, that thing where you just do more with less, eventually all we could do with less was less. So then this big backlog of money would stand there and people would say, well, that's wasteful. And they're not wrong. Like we want to spend it too. But yeah, it's definitely had a cost, especially because people look at that backlog and they give you less future money. And clearly our schools deserve and need that money. So it's been a very, very frustrating thing to be a staff member in capital programs, dealing with that.
And just to add some additional context to that, Director Jackson was mentioning about the audit that was, or the assessment that was performed probably 5 or 6 years ago at this point, and it was pretty much the findings showed that in comparison to a Montgomery County, that our project management team was managing 12 times the volume of projects in which their peers were managing and other LEAs. And so just that in itself, we're not even talking about the design, the lack of having design professionals, the lack of having planning professionals, the lack around not having the adequate fiscal professionals that you need in order to move the financial paperwork through in a timely and efficient process. And so, I think I want to say it was around 40% the size that we were in comparison to Montgomery County. And so we were more than half the size of them, but putting out more volume, more projects. The benefit is also Montgomery County is different. They have a larger tax base. They have more tax revenue. They were able to forward fund some of their projects. Whereas on our end, we solely depend on the funding that we receive. And so they're able to actually move forward with progress, move forward with design, move forward with construction, and on the back end actually request the funding for reimbursement versus on our end, it's when the money's there, we need to spend it. We need to get through some of these emergencies, especially when the money has been in a category like the roof replacements has been underfunded for some time. We were talking earlier about how does the priority get set, and so we have a database that identifies all of our roofings for each facility, the age of each roof, the different sections, because we may do partial replacements this year in order to just limp it along. But as she said, we need somewhere around funding to replace 15 to 16 per year just to be on pace with our inventory. And for a few years, I don't think we received funding at all. We have, we're talking about what are we doing? Earlier question came on, what are we doing in terms of if we don't have the money, et cetera. And so what we've been doing for quite some time is just trying to look at all the different avenues that exist, whether it's the ESSER funds in order to maximize those, whether it's the healthy school funds in order to maximize additional funding in order to support some of these initiatives that we know that we need, whether the agent school program is another one, that VLT, which I know we had before, but that was, I don't think we have it any longer, but that was another avenue that we relied heavily on in order to try to push some of these initiatives to bridge the gap between our county and funding, our state funding, and what our true needs are for the program itself. But back to the size of the department, it's just when you have such a deteriorated facilities and program that we have, and the need for replacement, holistic replacement, it's a larger conversation. It's the internal staffing that you need in order to make sure that we can deliver on time, that we can push the initiatives when the money is there. But there's also those hard conversations looking at our inventory and looking at the number of facilities that we have, and is it ever going to be adequate funding in order to address that, or does there need to be a right sizing in our inventory? It's also looking at some of the the critical projects that come online, and how do you properly address that? Sometimes while we know that it may make sense just to go out and replace a roof at a school, but if it's under enrolled and it's within 2 other schools that are under enrolled, why should we not explore consolidation in order to make the right decision, or at least explore the right decisions or options and present those to the board so we can make a comprehensive decision on what's best, not just for the school system, but the county and the state as well, because we know that funding is a premium. And I think Director Jackson mentioned last year we received, I think, $120 million. We were being told we're right around 100 million this year, so even less than last year. And so we're not receiving more, we're receiving less. So, I think it's all of those things that we need to explore.
I just want to note one thing, like I know we said that we need 570 million a year. I just want to note that just a few years ago, our average funding was 220 million. So it was short of that modernization need, but it's currently, cut in half. And no, we don't really have a solution for that yet. It's relatively new economic realities. And so as we present the master plan this year, we'll have to talk about what does that do to our schedule and the projects that we all believe in and we're committed to. And I just want to just submit this piece out here. There was somebody once who was like, we need to cut like the IRS auditors. And they were like, well, when you hire auditors, you save money overall though, right? We bring more money in than our salaries. And there's an element of that to the capital programs team, because if you under-resource the people managing $1 billion portfolio to save a $90,000 or $120,000 salary, there's a part where it might be penny-wise and pound-foolish.
And just to add one last thing, Director Jackson, the biggest thing that we battle as well is just the competition within the industry, within the DC marketplace. Construction, in the private sector is up. It has been up for quite some time. And so when we're talking about not just, having the not having the capacity or not having the staffing, but also once we were able to get approval for those positions, we actually held vacancies for over a year, 2 years, 3 years in some cases, because we could not attract the top candidates that we needed in order to be able to fulfill those positions, because just the private sector and just trying to compete with that is just a struggle, in the DC marketplace for construction.
Yeah, I think it's back to you, Board Member Boozer Strother, and I did have a question, but I'm not sure if Jackson does.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I did see Chair Jackson raise his hand for a moment. Should we give you a moment to come on camera? Or just audio, if that's the only possibility for you right now?
I'm fine. I just had a question. Two questions. So the first thing is that how do we see so I guess I'll ask like this. So Prince George's County is expected to grow significantly in the next, decade or so. And so how do we intend on managing these challenges with respect to the population boom that's expected? Meaning that we already have a lot of, dilapidated infrastructure and, new needs for buildings and stuff like that. Do we have a plan to to kind of level set with the population boom or cater to the population boom that's expected?
So I will note that that is a major part of the master planning process, is to look at those development trends, those birth rate increases, moving pieces of population, and to respond to that. So that's why if you look at our cycle 1, it's trying to increase capacity in areas where at the time, those were the trends. And an update to that master plan would absolutely have to do the same thing. Sometimes when you use the word boom, though, it gets a little scarier, because if you show up overnight, it's hard for us to respond within the context of that timeline we presented last time and all of those steps that we have to follow to get the funding and do the planning pieces. And so that's where we end up having to do like the modular classrooms or the temporary modulars, and we can't even really do those as fast as we would like to right now. But we definitely agree that those are really substandard learning environments when you have overutilization. So we agree with the prioritization. We just have some honestly longer processes than we would like, in addition to the funding challenges, to really address population shifts that are occurring quickly.
Yes, because I was looking at like just the housing market and get in general. I know we were talking about construction in general, and I feel like the surrounding areas in the DMV I don't know if this artificially or not, but like I feel like the housing market is inflated a little bit. And so I feel like it's pushing people over into this side of the DMV. And the reason why, I leverage that word boom specifically is because I feel like it's like projected growth just from like the natural variables that occur in, any like local system. But then I think it's sped up because of the inflated housing prices or the housing market around the other adjacent jurisdictions that will push people who probably wouldn't have moved here. But I mean, and I mean, I think some people describe it as like concentrated poverty being pushed into um, Prince George's County by the other neighboring jurisdictions. Whether it's intentionally or not intentionally, that's not what intentional or not intentional is not where I'm going. I'm just more so saying, how can we make sure that we're best suited to take care of it? And I guess you're saying by continuously updating the plan and seeing how we can adjust, real time.
Yeah, I'll recognize more time if there is a response from Director Jackson or anyone else that would like to comment on that aspect that Chair Jackson just raised.
No, I think his summary is exactly where my mind was on it. And I just want to note that the master plan does get amended every year. The updates are, excuse me, like a little slower to occur, but that's something, that with people accounting and boundaries, we're looking at a lot. But I just feel that funding constraint is so frustrating, right? Because ultimately you need to increase capacity, and that gets hard. And then when there's a poverty element, it does get trickier because that usually is more of a boom, and it's more of a boom in like maybe apartment buildings, which can fill up an elementary school really, really quickly and end up in substandard conditions. So that's just definitely something that we look at every iteration. The enrollment numbers aren't just in our EFMP, they are in our CIP. There is a little bit of funding that's available for enrollment growth. That's usually been in North County for us, but anywhere it's available that does help. It gets us a little bit more state funding, like $7 or $8 million. And so it's not insignificant. It's just not a brand new elementary school.
Thank you. Moving to second round, Vice Chair Briggs.
Okay, thank you so much, Board Member Booster Struther. I'm not going to belabor the point. I just wanted to kind of double click on what Board Member Booster Struther was saying around kind of the inflation of prices. And I was curious as I was thinking about the last time you all talked about the construction, and I know that during that time there was I believe towards the end of the Trump administration, and there was the pieces around the tariffs and I think the kind of inflated cost of steel. And so I'm just knowing that we're kind of going into that era again, while we're also dealing with this deficit at the state level and all of the other challenges. And I know that not to kind of, make this a like, let's all be angry about the fact that there's understaffing, but I guess not to add insult to injury, but you all don't have a policy team either. You don't have people who are like thinking about kind of the landscape analysis of what it's going to look like 10 years out from the policy end and what backwards planning we can do to really make sure that we're advocating for the right things. Case in point was today we were in a May discussion, the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, talking about the blueprint funding, and someone brought up the idea of like flexible funding. Like, we are already paying the $60K for the base salary for teachers, but we'd love to take that money that we're going to get for that and put it somewhere else. But the, legislation doesn't allow us to do that. So was just thinking about like whatever creative solutions as we're thinking about the looming challenges that are kind of awaiting us. What are some of the things that we could be thinking about to really support you all in advance of that? Know that we don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know for sure what's going to happen, but I think we all have a probability wise, like what's likely to happen. And so I just wanted to say that that if there's anything, I think I would want to echo you all sharing that with us and getting ahead of it, so that at least we can start to think about seeds we can plant with the legislators as they're thinking about revamps to the legislation or ways to kind of present additional pieces to support us as a district.
I would like to respond to that one. The most tangible way I would say as we go into this legislative session is really around the preservation of grant funding. We are being incredibly aggressive around sustainability. and specifically net zero, carbon free schools. Pretty much all of the schools we are designing now are for that. And right now, Maryland Energy Association Administration, they have grant programs that are there, but they're yearly. And so those provide, I think, for the phase two first three schools, we got $3 million that we can use to help further additional programs. So anything that can be help that can help to advocate for keeping those programs in place, because we are trying to lead the state, and we feel if these grants are taken away, it could actually end up penalizing us because we are paying more for better quality schools than than what is out there and what's normal, because we really want to push the envelope, and that's what the board has required us to do. So that would definitely be a place where and there's a lot of wait and see with the new administration, because they like, and so that's a place where you all having that view outside of we're tunnel vision here, but just having that view, that would be immensely helpful for us to help supplement some of these funds that we need.
Does that conclude your round two, Vice Chair Briggs?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands. I'll take a brief round two if you wouldn't mind, Vice Chair Briggs.
Yes, recognizing Board Member Booster Strother.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm responding to Director Jackson, how you continued along the lines about my concerns about when that under-resourcing is a risk, and how you phrased that, I think, was very, very helpful. So, the thing that I hope from this audit committee is that we look at, auditing is for good and proactive around these realities, because I think, unfortunately, there's this environment of that to audit means you're finding waste only, and therefore it's always a cut. And I think our responsibility around auditing is good management, and growth can be the answer. And I just feel like we really need to be saying that more, and hearing from our divisions about what would it look like if the under-resourcing weren't there, creating risks that are misunderstood. And this is every division in PGCPS, and it has been that way for a very long time. And I think as a county, we've accepted it for way too long in terms of our state and county funding as the needed answer in some of these cases. So much of the case. So I hope that we could all continue to work together, because I'll say it again, your division is under a lot of scrutiny because it's so visible, and that we will continue to work together on what it really can mean to be an audit committee of a board that works towards mitigating risks. And sometimes that means that something grows. So that is all that I wanted to leave us with this conversation as my last as acting chair of this committee for this year. So I think I'll be able to close the discussion now. I'm not seeing any more questions. So I want to say thank you, Director Jackson, and to Mr. Smith, who contributed so much this evening, to Associate Superintendent Jason Washington, and of course, I always appreciate the Climate Change Action Plan and that incredible work that we're doing there, being added to these discussions. So item 4.0, follow-up and next steps. The follow-up items will be posted on board docs upon receipt. Item 5.0, closing remarks from the committee, vice chair, and adjournment. So again, thank you all for joining us for this great meeting. The question is to adjourn the January 13th, 2025 Board Audit Committee meeting without objection. There being no objections, the January 13th, 2025 Board Audit Committee meeting has been adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone, and thank you.
Be
Good evening.